I keep it right here. This is the audition call sheet from day one of the Office auditions. The number one name on that call sheet is me. I'm the first up.
Wow.
Rainn Wilson.
Wow.
Roles of Dwight and Michael at the Endeavor Agency. Time of the audition.
Wow. That's right. You auditioned to be Michael, too.
Yes. Terribly, but...
Hello, everyone. I'm Guy Raz, and you are watching The Great Creators. This is where I have conversations with some of the most celebrated actors, performers, and musicians of our time about creativity. And my guest today is actor Rainn Wilson from The Office. Rainn is probably best known for portraying one of the most iconic characters of the 2000s. Of course, Dwight Schrute. Rainn was a master of cringe on that show, but in real life, he's actually on a deeply earnest and sincere mission to help people tap into mindfulness and spirituality and to help them become more happy and resilient. So in this episode of the show, you will hear Rainn talk openly about his years of suffering from addiction and anxiety and what gave him the strength to break free from all of that. He also talks about what it's like to be a person of faith in the world of comedy, where religion is more often a punchline than a way of life. And he'll share his advice on how to bring a bit more spirituality into your own day-to-day life. But before we begin, here's what you need to know about Rainn. He describes himself as a socially awkward child, but he says that came to him naturally because his parents were actually quite odd and awkward themselves, and Rainn didn't exactly have a normal childhood.
My family were members of the Baha'i faith, and we did a thing called Baha'i pioneering, which is similar to missionary work, but it's not so much about converting the natives as it is going and kind of serving the community that you're in. So we lived in Nicaragua, and I came back.
When you were a little boy?
When I was a little boy, I came back. I was about five and a half, and I came back and started kindergarten in American schools right off the bat after living literally in the jungles of Bluefields, Nicaragua, the Mosquito Coast, one of the kind of wildest places on the planet. And so immediately from the outset, I just didn't understand, what little American boys and girls did in school. And and my parents are very odd. They're extremely socially dysfunctional and odd and alienated and uncomfortable, anxious, and just really lacking in social skills. So I realized this looking back. I didn't understand. When you're a child, you don't understand what's so off. We would be at an event and I would notice that things were like, why is everything so awkward? Everything is so dang awkward. What is going on? And then it was kind of, and even when I was 10, 11, 12, realizing why are my parents unable to just make conversation about the Seattle Seahawks or about the weather or just ask someone how they like their new car or just stuff that, people talk about. And I describe it as being like an alien child, and that's how I felt. I felt like an alien where I would observe other people and behaving, and then I would try and emulate what they would do.
I mean, it seems like, based on your description, that it was some people are just super socially awkward or they have social anxiety. It's not a choice. It's not like I'm going to be introverted and weird. It's just really hard for them to interact. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I am still very awkward, and I was awkward then.
Me too.
But at the same time, I was different than my parents because I really wanted to fit in and I wanted to be social. I wanted nothing more than to just be social and have friendships. But I would observe kids interacting like I would observe a kid in the lunchroom, and he'd go up to another kid and he'd be like, "Hey, bro, how's it going?" And he'd pat him on the back and they'd high five and "How was your weekend, bro?" And something like that. And I would observe that. And then I would be like, okay, I'm going to do that. Then I would go to someone that I knew and I would go, "Hey, bro," pat. "How was your weekend, bro?" High five. And it's like I was trying to,
Yeah.
needless to say, it never really worked out so well. But I think that kind of feeling like an alien in the human society, and I really related to all of those great alien in human society movies like Starman, and Brother from Another Planet, and those kind of movies, an Alien Among Us kind of genre.
Yep.
I think it helped me in playing Dwight Schrute because there's some elements of that in Dwight.
And on top of that, I mean, you grew up in the Baha'i faith, which obviously a lot more people know about today. But when you were a kid in the early 80s, late 70s, like it was probably people were like, what? Right? I mean, you must have felt even more isolated just at school, given that you had this community in this world and this culture that you were part of, but like people had no idea what that was.
Yes. So as if all of the oddness and disconnection I had previously described was not enough, then we were a member of an obscure, weird-sounding Eastern religion at the same time. And that didn't help my social prospects. Like, we would hang out with weird Rainn and his weird Baha'i parents. And then on top of that, then I end up playing the bassoon, and I'm on the chess team. And it's just like, I'm just...
Dungeons and Dragons.
I'm digging my... Back when Dungeons and Dragons had nothing cool about it whatsoever. No. In 1982, cool, 1983, there was zero cool about D&D. So I dug my grave pretty deep there.
When did you... I mean, I know that you guys moved to Illinois when you were 16, because I think your dad got a job at the Baha'i National Center at the time, and you moved to like maybe it's a suburb of Chicago.
That's right. Yeah,
Chicago.
We were just north of Chicago in Wilmette, Illinois. Mm-hmm.
And that's really when because from everything I've read about you and your own descriptions of your early childhood, it's like, okay, it was this awkward kind of geeky kid, just didn't fit in. But then in high school, you somehow got involved in the drama program. And this high school had like a really good drama program, which requires you to like come out of your shell. Tell me how were you secretly always interested in performing and getting on stage, and it didn't, and then all of a sudden you're 15 or 16, you're like, I'm gonna show people this thing.
It's so much more simple than that, and it's so much more pathetic than that. I'd always thought about doing acting, and I had kind of a longing to try it. So we moved to this new high school, and I took an acting class, and they had a kind of renowned, legendary acting department at New Trier High School. A lot of great actors have gone there over the years.
Rock Hudson and Margaret, I saw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lot of top actors, and I went to my first acting class, and they had an improv assignment of like, what do you do when you're alone in your room? So I put on some Elvis Costello music, and I just danced around like an idiot, and pretended to like play with my cat, and I just was a total goofball, and everyone was laughing, and I was this nerdy new kid at this high school, and all of a sudden all of these cute girls came over and were like, you're so funny, wow, hey, where are you from, will you come sit with us at our lunch table? And it's like, at that point in my head, a flip switched, and I was like, okay, no more chess, no more bassoon, I'm doing this is what I'm doing from now on. So, but I will say that honestly, drama saved me, and being a drama geek saved me, because it's such a beautiful, loving, diverse community. Everyone was welcome in the world of drama geeks. I mean, it didn't matter what nationality you were, what color your skin was, what sexuality you were, gender. It didn't matter, your size, your shape, if other people liked you or not. It was a very welcoming, loving, supportive community. And I loved that we could just be just ridiculous goofballs, and you could really let your freak flag fly, and all were welcome.
So you started to perform, and I mean, that was your first time performing in front of people in high school plays?
Yeah. I started in high school plays and pretty much never stopped. So I started around 17.
What were some of the, I mean, what were some of the early roles that you had in high school? Do you remember what the plays were?
I remember every single one of them. I played the dad in Time Out for Ginger, where the girl wants to join the football team. I was the Frog Prince in Story Theater, and I could still do, for those watching on the YouTubes, I could still do my frog face. So the frog gets turned into a prince. Check this out, guy.
See it? Yeah. Wow. Wow.
I highly recommend that you find the video of this.
Okay.
This section.
Is it somewhere on YouTube?
No, I'm to the listener, and that was my directions to the listener.
Oh, I see. All right. I thought I was like, wait, the video of you performing on stage
I played Doolittle, Alfred Doolittle in Pygmalion, and I played Judd Fry in Oklahoma, and I played Christian in Cyrano de Bergerac. He's supposed to be very handsome, and I'm not very handsome, so that was a little bit weird for me to play like a handsome, dashing guy. I gave it my best shot, but I really, I went for the comedy in that role.
Yeah. And you, I mean, that really kind of seems to have, I mean, the scenes did like kind of set you on a course because you, I mean, you're in high school, you moved there when you're 16, so you've got just 2 years of drama in high school, but you decide to pursue this in college. You go to Tufts first in Massachusetts, and then you transferred to the University of Washington in Seattle. But, I mean, drama. Like, this is what you decided that you wanted to pursue professional acting and presumably stage acting?
Well, I came to a crossroads when I was about 20 years old, and I was thinking, like, if I'm going to do this, I have to go in both feet first, and I've got to give it 10 years, and I have to just dedicate myself to it if I'm going to do this. And I know it's incredibly hard to make a living at. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. And I was wrestling, like, I'm either going to do it or I'm going to not do it. And I was trying to decide. And I was visiting my mom in Boston at the time. I was about 20 years old, 19, 20. And I went to go see the musical of A Chorus Line, which is one of the movie of the musical of The Chorus Line, which is one of the worst movie musicals ever made. Like, if you look at, like, Google top 10 worst movie musicals, Chorus Line is going to be right at the top. It was just an ill-conceived, poorly executed mess from top to bottom. But I went to a matinee in the middle of the day in Boston, and it was, of course, all about these actors that are singing and dancing and talking about making it and who am I anyway? Am I my resume? And
right.
And just they're longing to do theater and to perform and to dance and act. And I was sobbing in the theater. It was an empty theater. I was there by myself.
Wow.
Tears were rolling down my face.
Wow.
The movie ended. I walked outside. It was sunset, and it was snowing over Government Center in downtown Boston. It was beautiful red light refracting through the snow. And I just had that transcendent moment of, like, this is it. Yes, I'm going for this. I don't care what it costs. I am throwing my towel in with this lot, and I'm going for it 100%.
So you eventually went to, I mean, you pursued this at a graduate level. You went to NYU, to Tisch, to get an MFA in acting. And was the idea, I mean, I know it would be a while before you moved to LA, but you started out in New York. But was the idea, was your sort of hope that you would make it on Broadway, that's what you would pursue?
So I came from such a theater background, and I loved theater so much. My goal was to be a resident member of a repertory theater company. And there were a lot of repertory theater companies back in the 70s and 80s. And you could actually get a wage. You would be doing theater all year long, and sometimes you'd play big roles, sometimes you'd play small, and you were a company member. And there were like 20 or 30 theaters that had this model. And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to do Shakespeare one night and Eugene O'Neill the next night and a new play the next night and then, Moliere in the summer or what have you. And And so that's what I trained for, and that's what I hoped to train for. I had zero ambitions to be on a TV show or to make it in LA, or, even Broadway was like, maybe I would do a Broadway show, but I didn't think I would be a Broadway actor. I thought I would be making, $50,000 a year and just playing weird roles and have a little apartment in Baltimore or Milwaukee or someplace like that.
In a repertoire theater, yeah. I want to ask you about your first role on Broadway. I don't know what the play was, but it was at the Roundabout. What was the play?
London Assurance.
Right, London, and I believe for that role, and I hope this doesn't trigger anything, but you've written about this. You did not get good reviews for that.
I sucked, Guy. I was terrible. I was absolutely awful. It was my Broadway debut, and I was terrible. And I am so grateful for that experience. And it's one of the truly most important experiences in my life, and it was one of the most painful and failure-ridden experiences of my life. And, to me, it kind of contains the kernel of, one of life's great lessons, which is this theater director that I had worked with several times to great success in some classical plays is going to do a period comedy set in the 1800s on the Roundabout Theater on Broadway. He's like, I want you to play this lead role. Here's all the other incredible stars of the theater that are going to be in this play. So excited. And I knew I was going to be doing it like 6 months in the future. And I got so tense and so worked up and so in my head about it. So I felt so much pressure. I was like, oh my God, Rainn, you're going to get a New York Times review. Maybe you could sign with the William Morris Agency. Oh, maybe you'll get a Tony nomination. Maybe, everyone is going to see this. And I just tensed up. I don't know how to put it other than that. And when I rehearsed, I was just tense and forced and muscly and sweaty and wrong. And I got a little bit better once we were in front of an audience and loosened up a little bit, but once you've rehearsed it poorly, it's really impossible to get out of. And my wife was going to graduate school at the University of Iowa at the time, and I was on the phone with her every night sobbing because if you suck, like I've sucked on TV and film before, but I'm going in for a couple days or a couple weeks and then it's over, right? And in theater, you're spending 5 or 6 weeks, and then we performed it for like 4 or 5 months. So night in, night out, knowing that you suck going in. But the lesson of all this is like when it ended, I was like, enough of that. This comes back to the kind of like the alienated, awkward part of the conversation that we began with. When it ended, I was like, I'm never doing that again. I'm not going to feel that kind of pressure to perform, to conform to some idea of me, and the pressure to like succeed and what people think they need to see in me, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like, forget that. I'm going to embrace my inner weirdo, and just be who I am. And, screw them if they can't take it. This is who I am, and I have to be me. And I really was done with that whole phase. And I really, truly feel like I would not have gotten the role of Dwight Schrute, and I would not have brought him to life in the way that I did had I not gone through that horrific, painful, excruciating experience of bombing on Broadway.
And in some ways, like, it's sort of I hate to use this word, but it's kind of like a gift, right? That this happens to you in your late 20s because, as you say, like, you get reviewed. It's a terrible review. And then you've got to go to the theater the next day knowing that everyone's read that review.
Yep.
The whole cast, the whole crew, and nobody's talking to you about it. Maybe some people are averting their eyes. And you've got to do this for another 4 months every single day. Help me, like, I guess maybe you weren't, maybe you weren't sort of consciously thinking, how am I going to get through this? But how do you remember, like, kind of just getting through that? Because that's really hard.
It's incredibly challenging. And I didn't read the reviews, but I knew they were bad. You can just know when they're bad. So I didn't know like what they said specifically about me, but you can just kind of, it's in the air because no one mentions. When you get good reviews, everyone's like, hey, we got some great reviews.
Yeah.
And when you don't get good reviews, no one talks about reviews.
Yeah.
But I had this horrific thing where it was a 2-show day. I was laying down to take a little nap in my dressing room between the 2 shows. There was a Village Voice sitting there. And I was just thumbing through the Village Voice newspaper, just reading articles or whatever. And then boom, this review of our show was just right there in front of my face. I wasn't even looking for it or anything. It just was right there. And I looked down and saw my name, and it said something, as the young lovers, all is required of Catherine Misley, who played the lead opposite me, and Rainn Wilson, is that they be good-looking and charming. At least Ms. Misley is good-looking.
Wow.
And then they were like, places.
Wow.
Places, please. And it was how did I get through it? You know, the show must go on. You just do your best. You try and keep exploring the role. You try and bring it to life. Maybe you try and get an extra laugh here or there. And, you know, you put on as good a show as you can, because the ethos is that these people have paid $50, $70, $90 to come see you in a play and to see the whole play. And you just do your best. You just do your best. And you know, fortunately, there were some other great performances in the play, and the audiences enjoyed it, so that was good.
Tell me what was going on. I mean, your 20s, and for most people, our 20s they're hard. They're really hard because you're supposedly an adult, and now there are expectations, and you have expectations, and the world around you does. And for most people, unless you're very lucky, your 20s are just a mess. It's because you're still trying to find who you are, what you want to be. It takes a long time. I'm in my 40s and it's still, coming together, right? And you talk about that time as a period of just internal crises, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, all things I think I can certainly relate to. A lot of people can. Tell me what was going on in your life at that time that was triggering those things.
So right now, youth in America are in the midst of one of the greatest pandemics in human history, and that is the mental health crisis that's going on. I always say that, adults over 50 don't understand, the depths of this crisis. It's horrific. When we're talking about like almost 50% of college students having had at one point in time suicidal ideation. I mean, and
girls even higher.
Yeah, and over 50% in terms of anxiety disorders, depression. For decades, the loneliest generation was always senior citizens. They were always the loneliest until about 10 years ago. And all of a sudden, college kids are the loneliest generation. So it's really terrible, and it's something we have to really. The U.S. Surgeon General just released a report on it. It's the first time in American history that the Surgeon General has released a report on a mental health issue. So what I relate to it because that's what I was suffering from when I was in my 20s. We didn't have a name for it. We didn't have like a mental health moniker to stick on what.
And it was a stigma. It was stigmatized.
Yes.
You wouldn't talk about it.
And you wouldn't know how to talk about it. You didn't have the language to talk about it. Even like the word anxiety, like no one mentioned the word. They will say like, oh, I'm anxious that I can make my plane tomorrow at 6 a.m. But that's the only way you'd use the word. You wouldn't but I realize now, like I was in fact diagnosed with, a general anxiety disorder. I have an anxiety disorder. Manifests in a lot of different ways. And I spent a lot of my 20s trying to medicate it, with drugs and alcohol, and that didn't work out so well. And I've tried to medicate it with porn and with eating and with gambling and, all kinds of ways, and even workaholism and social media can be ways to try and medicate that anxiety. I've went through depressive periods and wrestled with addiction, and there were some very dark and troubling times in my 20s and 30s. And, again, and I still have to do daily kind of maintenance, I guess you would call it, on my anxiety. And at the same time, I am also grateful for what I went through and have been through, because it has kind of steered me to dig deeper on a spiritual path, on a path of wellness and well-being. And it kind of, the author Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, she has one of my favorite quotes. She says, I came to spirituality not out of virtue, but out of necessity. And that's exactly how I feel.
And so essentially you kind of had stopped, I don't know, you kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of sort of felt, I don't know, just abandoned your faith for a period of time. And because I know today, of course, you are, you talk about and have written about your faith. So what was happening in your life at that time kind of a catalyst to get you reconnected to your faith?
Yes. So I grew up a member of the Baha'i faith, and there were so many wonderful things about that experience. But, like many young people do, moving to New York City to pursue a career as an artist, the last thing I wanted to think about was morality and God and, religion and spirituality. I just wanted to have fun and study acting and have intense experiences, and I did all that. And so I really wasn't sure if I believed not only in the Baha'i faith, I didn't even think I believed in God. I spent several years as an atheist, and none of it made any sense to me. It felt like religion was so old-fashioned and crusty, and it was something that old grandmothers clung to out of kind of fear. And, but yeah, that mental health crisis kind of forced me on a spiritual path, because I was looking for anything to get my way out of, depression and self-loathing and unhappiness. And I read many of the world's great religious books, and I did a very deep dive. I took it very seriously, this journey. And ultimately, that was many, many years, but long story short, 8 years story short, eventually came back around 99, 2000, back into the Baha'i faith, and kind of re-embraced it as an adult.
Tell me a little bit about that, because this is a time that really kind of coincides with the next phase of your life and career, where you were obviously going to become a household name. And you were not aware of this at the time, obviously, but let's just talk about religion for a moment. And obviously in this specific case, the Baha'i faith, but it could be any religion, which is that, I think that there is a perception, rightly or wrongly, that like in comedy, so like we'll take comedy, and then you're Gen Xer, right? And being Gen Xer, like it's not cool to be earnest. You know that, because that's how we grew up. It's very uncool to be earnest. This is like the greatest sin of our generation, or was. And being faithful is being there's a real earnestness to it. It's like an exploration. It's internal. It's personal, and yet you are starting to, because you moved to LA in the late 90s, you're starting to get into this community of comedians, comics, that world of like, and obviously I know there's a lot of kindness there, but it's also, I can't imagine there's a lot of like religious faith in that community either.
No. The lamest thing you can do in the world of comedy is be religious. So right. Not only do I not fit in with anyone anywhere, then all of a sudden I'm embraced in the acting world, and then the acting world, they honestly don't know what to think about this guy who's playing this weird paper salesman beet farmer, and is very earnestly talking about the soul and the life of the soul and God and whatnot. It is really, and they're like, is he in a cult? Is he born again? Is he judgmental? What the hell is going on? It just did not compute. I cannot tell you the number of times that comedians have just really been just freaked out by a fellow comic actor talking about those very earnest topics.
Yeah. See, I'm curious of how, and I want to ask you this a little later, but how it kind of informed how you approach roles. But let me ask you about this time before you were cast in The Office, because you got. I mean, I think it's an amazing story. I mean, when you got the role as Dwight, I mean, I think you were either almost or you were 40.
Yeah, maybe 39-ish. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Almost 40.
And obviously a role that would change your life and change television. Mm-hmm. But, you know, by some accounts, that would be like late. Like for a lot of actors, you would I imagine they would think, God, if by the time I'm 40, I haven't, you know, reached or achieved this thing or gotten a role, like my career is probably not going to take off. Did you have any of that anxiety in your 30s? Like, or were you not really stressed out about that?
That's a great question. I remember being so down when I first moved to LA that I wrote the artistic director of the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, where I had worked several times, and said, you know, I want out of this treadmill. You know, can I move to Minneapolis? If I move to Minneapolis, you know, can you get me some work there at your theater? And I didn't hear back. And then his assistant wrote back and was like, hey, sorry, he's really busy with, you know, directing, but he asked me to write you and say, you know, we can't really guarantee any roles, but, you know, we really think you're very talented, and, you know, good luck on your journey. And I was like, womp, womp. So my wife and I had long discussions every year or two about like, do we just quit this and move to like Minneapolis or Seattle or Portland or, you know, one of the places we were from, and just work in the theater or teach acting somewhere or something like that. But I think for me, Guy, what I kept looking at is like, because I did nothing but theater in New York for 9 or 10 years, and I never made over $20,000 in a year for 9 or 10 years. So I was always on the verge of destitute. And, but every year, if I looked back, there was progress being made. So every year, and I think this was another life lesson. I kind of looked back, like things were moving forward very, very slowly, very incrementally, but they were moving forward. So by the time I got to The Office, like, and I'm not just talking about income, I'm talking about like quality of jobs or quality of people I was working with or rapidity of jobs or maybe a little better agent or better representation or a door opening that hadn't been opened before. And I was just like, I just can't, I really want to quit, but I can't quite quit because I seem to be moving forward. But yeah, getting world famous at 39, 40, because it really was 40 that The Office kind of took off, was pretty crazy. And I had been acting professionally for 17 years at that point.
Right. Right. I mean, you'd already been in 6 Feet Under and you were in some horror movies and stuff. But I mean, that was really obviously a huge shift. I remember I lived in the UK in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And so I knew that show really well. It was hard for me to watch the Ricky Gervais original Office. It's so funny, but it's so painful. And obviously the Steve Carell character is also quite painful to watch. But I looked at your audition for the Dwight character, and it's pretty remarkable because it is so close and true to who you portrayed. Mm-hmm. I mean, that the audition for that character was the character. And first of all, I wonder, how did you, when you your agent was contacted, they wanted you to try out for this role, but how did you, I mean, you had a script, but how did you think about bringing that character to life and making him just a unique American comedic character?
Well, I was a big fan of the British show. I saw it very early on.
Yeah.
A friend of mine had gotten a VHS tape with some episodes on it, and we would gather around and watch the episodes, and they were being passed around actors and in LA, you know, in those very, very early years. And there was rumors like, oh my God, the show The Office on BBC. Oh my God, Ricky Gervais.
Yeah. It was crazy. It was so different than anything.
And Mackenzie Crook, who played Gareth, the Dwight-ish role, was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant and memorable, unique, fascinating, and very, very odd. And when they had the breakdown of the character of Dwight, and I found out that I was going to be able to audition, it was one of those things. It was kind of similar to walking out of the theater of a chorus line in the beautiful sunset at a government center in Boston. It's like, this role is mine. There's no one else that can play this role. I know exactly who this guy is. I know exactly how to play him. This is completely in my wheelhouse. There's no one else that can come close to just owning this guy. And the self-seriousness, the awkwardness, the physical comedy, the awkward pauses, the kind of, at turns he's nerd and at turns he's bully. That kind of like, it flips a switch and he's bullying or he is nerdy, and which is a wonderful dichotomy that I had never seen in a character before. It's, you're either a bully or you're a nerd. You're not kind of a nerd bully. You're not a nully, a bird. Sorry. So I just knew who the guy was, and I knew the casting director, Allison Jones. She brought me in. In fact, as a matter of fact, Guy, I keep it right here. This is the audition call sheet from day one of the Office auditions. The number one name on that call sheet is me. I'm the first up.
Wow.
Rainn Wilson.
Wow.
Roles of Dwight and Michael at the Endeavor Agency. Time of the audition.
Wow. That's right. You auditioned to be Michael, too.
Yes. Terribly, but I knew that wasn't going to happen.
Are there any other names on that list who are also ended up in the show?
Yes. Jenna Fisher, number 13, auditioned for Pam at 2:50 p.m. And there were some great actors on here. Hamish Linkletter, Marilyn Rice-Cub, Adam Scott, Matt Besser and Matt Price, Ever Carradine, brilliant actress, wonderful actors all around on here.
It's. I mean, can you imagine to be a fly on the wall at that audition? I mean, you think about that show and what and how important it was in an American comedy, 9 seasons. But like, people forget the first season, maybe even the first 2 seasons. Like, it was not a sure thing, and it was not necessarily going to be renewed. Like, nobody really watched it or got it. I mean, people watched it because it was on network TV, but nobody really, it wasn't a hit right away.
We were almost canceled about 7 different times. People don't really believe me around that, but our first season was 6 episodes back in the day when no one did 6-episode seasons. Our next season was picked up for like another 6 or 7, and then they added 1, and then they added 2, and then they added 1 more, and then finally we got the whole. And we thought we were going to be something like Arrested Development, which was kind of happening right before us, where we were like, oh, we'll be this quirky, weird, wonderful comedy that very few people are going to watch, and we're going to do 10 or 20 episodes, and it'll be on a DVD, and people will go back to it and watch it, and
they'll be like Freaks and Geeks,
or the Ben Stiller Show, or Party Down, or one of those shows that is really terrific, but doesn't bloom into a big hit. And then all of a sudden, we just climbed up the charts, and we got picked up.
What happened? What do you think happened?
Well, a number of things happened. We were good, and we were on the air, and people talked about us, number one. So that was very helpful. But one of the seminal incidents that happened that I think is fascinating is that was the first Christmas where they started to sell video iPods. I don't know if you remember, in 2004 or 5.
I had one.
5, 6, right in there.
Yep, I had one.
They sold a video iPod, and this was an iPod. It had a little video screen, and you could watch shows on it. And what they did is they preloaded the iPod. I don't know how they chose this. They preloaded The Office onto it. A handful of, maybe it was the Office Christmas episode or something like that.
Yeah.
So all of these kids got, all of these rich kids, should I say, and college kids got this video iPod right when it came out, and then it had those Office episodes, and they started watching The Office from that. Wow. And then, I don't know if you remember, there was this iTunes chart where you could download, you pay 99 cents and download a TV show to your iPod. We were always at the top of that because they all of a sudden they realized, like, oh my God, this show, which we thought was going to be for middle-aged people because it was about life in an office environment, is actually a hit among 20-somethings and teenagers who have never even been in an office.
It's so funny because I read that. So I mentioned to my kids that we're going to have this interview today, and they're both at school right now while we're recording this, and they're like, "Oh my God, you are! I love Dwight so much." They're 12 and 14 now. They're talking about that character. And I was like, "How do you guys even know the show?" And they're like, "What do you mean, Daddy?" And apparently, like, that's where your hardcore fans like were, that 12 to 17-year-old boys. Like, they loved that Dwight character.
Yeah. It's true. From the moment the show dropped, so we're talking almost, we're talking almost 20 years, 18 years of the show being on the air, because it went on in late 2004, I believe, early 2005. I can't remember, right in there. Our main audience were teenagers and college kids. And so there's been a generation that grew up that, a lot of fans started watching it at that time when they were in high school. And now we have legions of new fans watching it on streaming. When it was on Netflix, it just was the #1 hit on Netflix. And more people saw it when it was on Netflix than saw it originally on NBC. So there was this wave, especially early on in the pandemic, just wave after wave of The Office sweeping. And then there's memes and YouTube videos and TikTok videos and whatnot. So I feel so blessed and so grateful, Guy, because I know so many people that have been on TV shows that no one watches, or they watched at the time and then they're forgotten, I had a friend who was on the show Yes Dear. Yes Dear was on CBS for like 10 years. It was a huge hit, huge, way bigger numbers than The Office. No one even remembers that exists. Nothing against the show. It's a totally fine show. Right. But I feel so blessed that not only to get on any TV show is a miracle. To have that TV show last is a double miracle. And then to have that TV show become a classic is it's 1 in a million.
How did you, and there was 9 seasons and it was fresh all the way till the end. And how did you, I'll watch that show and especially your character, I'll watch scenes of him and the dialogue. I can't even imagine how it was written on the page, and then handed to you I have to imagine that big parts of that show were improvised.
Yes and no. The writing was so good and so smart. There's a lot of times that we would just shoot a scene and be like, should we improvise? We would always get it as scripted. So that was law #1 from Greg Daniels, our show's creator. Get it as scripted. Make sure you have really good versions of it, just exactly how it is on the page. So, the writer who has put a lot of time into the script is happy in the editing room. And then sometimes we'd just be like, should we add anything? Should we improvise? Should we mix it up? And it's just like, no, it's pretty just perfect the way it is. And so we're really lucky to have incredible writers. And yeah, I would say in the final cut, about maybe a quarter of what you see on the screen is improvised. So, and there were sometimes we would just go completely off book and just start going down weird improvisational rabbit holes and whatnot. And so sometimes you'll see a scene and it was 3 or 4 lines, and sometimes you'll see a scene that were scripted, and sometimes you'll see a scene and the whole thing was scripted. So, and I love that seamless blend. You can't tell, when I love it. When people come up to me and say, oh, my favorite line is blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And then I think in my head, like, oh, I made up that line on the spot. Like that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, not just the role of Dwight, but all of the roles that you've played. And by the way, I love Dr. Demento in the Weird Al movie. It's so funny. That it's such a great character, and you did that brilliantly. You've talked about how your faith sort of triggers and influences your creativity, and how it even plays a part in how you portray a character like Dwight. Like you've essentially implied that you can make a direct connection to the tenets of your faith, to what you believe, and a character like Dwight. Can you connect those dots a little bit for me?
Sure. I was in a conundrum early on in my acting career in Los Angeles, where I was getting more and more interested in my faith and being of service and connecting with, the divine will of the universe and what my place was in the world and what I should be focusing on. And I did a lot of study and prayer and meditation about it and deep dives around it. And, one of the things that exists in pretty much any faith tradition is that the universe hands you a set of qualities as a human being, talents and abilities. And it's up to us to do with those, to maximize those. And one of mine is to play characters and to play oddball characters and bring them to life, and people laugh at them. That's why I started acting in the first place, after all. So I really felt like, okay, so for whatever reason, God has made me this quirky character actor. I should just go with that. And so that was part of it. But as I started like really diving deeper into the Baha'i faith, I started finding all of these incredible quotes about how art and prayer, art is worship in the Baha'i faith. There's not a differentiation between creating something beautiful and praying and worshiping. That in a way, the highest kind of worship is to create something where there used to be nothing. It is an emulation of the divine impulse. I mean, 7 billion years ago, there was nothing. And then with the advent of the Big Bang, all of a sudden, energy, light, matter, time. And the artist does the same thing on a blank page or on a blank stage. There is nothing, and then there is something, and it is beautiful, and it is moving, and it is interesting. A lot of the time, sometimes it sucks. But this idea that the creation of art, and then I thought, well, does sitcoms count? I mean, I'm doing a sitcom in order so that NBC can sell toothpaste and Toyotas on the commercial breaks. Is that really art? It's like, well, yeah, I'm bringing a character to life and providing entertainment and people. And I tell you, the most profound experiences that I've had, and what I did not expect, let's not forget, like I really did The Office so that I could buy a house. Let me be perfectly clear. But the number of people, I mean, every day, thank you for The Office. Thank you for Dwight. My parents were getting a divorce and we laugh at him. My sister had cancer and we would watch it in the hospital. I was going through a deep depression and The Office helped me so much, especially during the pandemic, especially during this mental health crisis. There is and I'm so grateful to that I was able to kind of harness my weird abilities, help tell stories that were impeccably written, and that finding out that the creation of art is the same as worship in my faith tradition. And that it has created, and here's the last part of it, is that art at its best provides a service. It provides a solace. It uplifts the heart. It opens the eyes. It creates a beauty that you see in front of you, or the beauty of a poem or a song that you've never heard before, that transports you. It reminds you of the ineffable mystery of being a human being. There's something transcendent and incredibly uplifting about good and great art. And that's all I ever wanted to be a part of.
it's interesting because we can talk about your very public acting career, but we can also talk for the entire interview about your, you're also public part of you, which is your deep interest in religion. You've got a podcast, Metaphysical Milkshake. You've written books about it. You've got another book about spirituality, and I'm curious to get your take on this. I mean, you've mentioned this kind of epidemic of depression and anxiety, and there are many explanations or possible explanations for why. Some people point to social media as a huge reason behind that, and I think there's some truth to it. But I also think that if you think about the past sort of 10 years or 15 years, or maybe more, at least in the United States, there's been a huge sort of decline in religious attendance, right? When I was a kid, when you were a kid growing up, like we either went to church or synagogues or whatever, we knew kids who did. And it's not like it was a better time necessarily, but there was something that grounded communities. And in the absence of that, people find other types of communities. It might be, it might be MAGA. It might be extreme left politics. It might be something, you know what I mean? And you've made the case, and you are making the case, that we maybe need to go sort of seek out those more spiritual, meaningful elements to kind of revive, I don't know, to sort of to rebuild or to reestablish some kind of connection, right? I mean, is that a sort of a fair description of what you believe right now?
Kind of. Yes, for the most part. But there's something that's important to differentiate. It's important to differentiate spirituality from religion. And because to a lot of people, they're synonymous. And you talk about spirituality and they're like, I don't like spirituality. And you see how corrupt the church is? And it's like, okay, well, I had a director he said, I understand you believe in God. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, well, I could never believe in God. And when I was a kid, I got dragged to church 3 times a week, and I had to be a choir boy, and I had to snuff out the candles, and I had to help pour the wine backstage, and my mom dragged me there all the time. I could never believe in God. It's like, and I didn't have the heart to point out his kind of faulty logic, but that God might exist even if his mom was giving him some religious trauma along the way. So spirituality is really the focus on or the study of anything inherent in a human being that isn't the material. So it's our qualities of what I would call the divine. It's our qualities of kindness, compassion, love, humility, honesty, etc., that are our higher, quote unquote, higher nature, as opposed to our baser animal nature. Now, there are a plethora of spiritual tools that belong to all of the world's religions. The Buddha talked about, his first teaching is life is suffering. In the Sanskrit, it was dukkha, was a dissatisfaction, a chronic dissatisfaction. Life is about a chronic dissatisfaction, and we create this dukkha by clinging to outcomes and being afraid of change. And so the best way to deal with suffering is to release any expectations and to be in the moment and to understand that life is filled with change and pain, and then this releases us from this cycle of suffering, right? So you don't have to be a Buddhist to practice that. You can go to therapy and practice that. You can be an atheist.
Mindfulness, right? I mean, the tenets of mindfulness obviously come from
mindfulness practice, and John Kabat-Zinn and positive psychology movement drew a lot from Buddhist precepts. Buddhist precepts draw a lot from the Upanishads and the Vedas and the kind of the ancient Hindu texts that even predate kind of the polytheistic Hinduism as we know it today. The Vedic thought, which is some of the most profound stuff you can ever get your hands on, was written 3,500 years ago. Some of the most ancient texts in human history. So these are spiritual tools that everyone can use and benefit from. The problem is because we have jettisoned religion to such a large degree, I say we've thrown the spiritual baby out with the religious bathwater.
Yeah.
And because there are so many wonderful tools in religion itself that have been brought to us in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Upanishads, in the Dhammapada of the Buddha, and the list goes on, in the Baha'i holy writings, that we've jettisoned them as well. And young people today could greatly benefit from the tools that these spiritual teachings provide. And in Soul Boom, my new book, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, we need a spiritual revolution because we're at the precipice. Humanity is at the precipice, both with climate change, militarism, nationalism, also kind of the petering out of capitalism, and at the same time, this mental health crisis and pandemic at the same time. So we need these spiritual tools. And I could do a whole other thing about religion, but that's a whole other topic. And religion does offer some incredibly beautiful panaceas to the innate human loneliness and pain and anxiety. It offers community, it offers a mission, a vision, a purpose, and it offers transcendence. And good religion, it can be a force for good and a force for healing, and sometimes we forget that.
Let me ask you about the tools for a moment, right? I mean, it's one thing to say we need a spiritual awakening, but it's another thing. The next question is, well, how? What do I do, right? Because for a lot of people, that it's not clear what that means, and that it's not clear to them how they can seek those tools and implement them and bring those ideas into their own life and practice.
Right. Excellent question. I get into this in my book a little bit. Let me bring up something I touched on briefly, which is suffering. So one of the biggest issues that health professionals talk about with young people is their lack of resilience. Dr. Lisa Miller from Columbia University wrote an exceptional book this last year, one of my favorite books I've ever read, called The Awakened Brain, that is filled, for those skeptics out there, with hard data from multiple studies showing that a spiritual practice, a spiritual discipline, spiritual belief, spiritual community can provide a solace to mental health issues and greatly increase well-being. So suffering. So we talked a little bit about it from a Buddhist perspective. But in all of the religions of the world, the idea is that suffering is a necessary part of life, that it is how we grow. We talked my story about bombing on Broadway and sobbing every night. And yet I am so grateful that that happened, because it allowed me, frankly, an acting career, because I went through that pain. So when you start to unpack the nature of suffering, why we suffer and what suffering does to us, there's an amazing series of analogies in the Baha'i faith about suffering that are like, the tree that is the most pruned is the tree that grows the strongest and the healthiest and the most beautiful, right? The ground that is the most tilled grows the healthiest garden. The analogies are abundant. They go on, and they're in every faith tradition. So but if you're not raising your children with any faith tradition or any spiritual tools, suffering is bad and to be avoided at all cost. And there is an idea that, I want to live my life without any suffering. I just want to be content. But that's not going to work, okay? Because remember the Buddha's first law, right? So if you use the tools of spirituality to incorporate what suffering is and why it exists in your life. Why do people get sick? Why do we die? Why is there something as horrible as cancer? Like why do we have setbacks? What do they do for us? And how do we overcome them? There are spiritual tools to help you with this. Now, God bless the positive psychology movement, because it's an amazing movement that only started in the late 90s with Dr. Martin Seligman and others that have really taken some of these spiritual precepts and put them into practice psychologically, and they're on to something really transformative.
One of the things that I keep hearing, a word that you use is community. And you mentioned Lisa Miller, and there are others like Robert Waldinger of the famous Harvard study on happiness and longevity, and the word that he uses time and again is community. It's like relationships, community. And I read an article recently about, and I really identified with this because it was about middle-aged men and how we've talked about this sort of crisis in mental health among young people, and that's very real. But it also talked about how middle-aged men now have far fewer friends than they did 10, 20, 40, 60, 100 years ago, that it's very, very hard. I shouldn't say men, maybe women too, but the article is about men, and I thought it's so interesting. It becomes quite difficult at a certain point in your life, especially for men, to develop those kinds of relationships that you need for a community. And I'm curious, you are a famous person, right? And obviously there are people you knew before you were famous, but you met a lot of people after that. How do you do you struggle with friendships? Do you have a hard time developing new friendships? How do you navigate that?
Excellent question. You should do this professionally. This is a big problem. It is a multifaceted one, and there's a lot to unpack around what I would call male intimacy. So part of it has to do with by the way, would you like to be friends? Would you be friends with me, Guy? All right, let's be friends. Sweet, I love it. We're going to hang out. We are going to hang out. We're going to have some Frogurt. We're going to watch the Knicks.
I'm going to talk about my vulnerabilities, my fears.
Yep, we're going to talk. Well, this is part of it is what they call toxic masculinity. I don't really like that phrase very much. It's very divisive, and I don't think it really sums up what we're talking about. But let's talk about a reinvigorated definition of what it means to be a man. And part of what it means to be a man is to be vulnerable, and that vulnerability is not a weakness, but it actually is a strength. And so,
but still hard for many men to show that vulnerability to others. But
absolutely, I remember when I first got into therapy, and I had two runs at it. Once was when I was suicidal in my 20s in New York City, and then when I was cycling through various drugs and alcohol and stuff, and then another time was when I really wanted to get serious about the therapeutic process when I was living in Los Angeles. Because I had these awkward, weird parents and we never talked about emotions, I had no vocabulary to talk about emotions. And I think this is something that men really lack. I remember my therapist had this kind of like color wheel of emotions. And I would say, he said, how are you feeling? And I'd be like, kind of frustrated with my career. And he'd pull out this like color wheel. I'd be like, frustrated. Let's look on the color wheel. Like, is that really what you're feeling? Because here's overwhelmed. Here's like exasperated. And there were all of these words. I was like, oh, wow. I had no idea that there was this whole vocabulary of hundreds of words that one could use to sum up how you were feeling. But that exercise of like looking inside and then giving a voice to what I was feeling and then sharing that with someone, that wasn't something I learned until I was in my late 30s, early 40s, really.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing that work. So I feel very fortunate that I have found community in some other ways. I have found community in my faith, where I've found, a handful of men that want to find their path, want to serve humanity, want to serve, for lack of a better word, God's will. And we're on a similar path. We believe in the power of prayer and in meditation. And I'm also in 12-step programs, which is an amazing community that you can go into as a celebrity and everyone's the same, and we're all just bozos in the back of the bus, and we're all struggling, and we share and we consult with each other and we call each other and give each other feedback and support each other. And that's been a really remarkable community as well. But this is a problem. They just did a study I read the other day that most men have one friend, and that's their wife.
Yeah.
And then they keep in touch
Yeah.
with a handful of high school and college friends, and then they have their work buddies that they maybe play golf with and high five occasionally, but that's the extent of it.
I think you're right that we're at this sort of inflection point. I mean, I think a lot of people recognize that. I mean, they're just our politics, our climate. I mean, there's so many huge things. I mean, I think you're in California, right?
Yeah.
And so the last few weeks alone have just been crazy with the weather.
Nuts. A totally biblical, apocalyptic.
Apocalyptic, no question. It's the future. And so we are maybe ripe for some kind of spiritual reawakening, for lack of a better term. But I wonder, I mean, you mentioned ideas like kindness and vulnerability and civility and just a kind of communitarianism. Not we all share everything, but we just have more of a community-minded spirit. And I wonder, I don't know. I mean, I want to see that future. I want to live in that place, but I don't know how that happens. I just don't see it. I see us in a place, at least in the United States, and even in other countries, but I know this one the best, that we're just so stuck in a really rough place that I don't know how we get to that sort of reawakening or that reconnection. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Can I plug my book?
Yeah, that's absolutely. Yeah, please.
So that's the thesis of my book. That's what Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, that's the whole spiritual revolution part. The way that current systems are set up right now, the way that I see it, is they are set up upon a foundation of and a mechanism of some of the worst qualities of humanity. So every existing system, environmental systems, agricultural systems, healthcare systems, educational systems, certainly political and military systems, are set up on the idea of one-upsmanship, competition, contest, survival of the fittest, may the best man win. And so it is absolutely unsustainable to think that all of these systems are going to be set up in this kind of like hierarchical, kind of rabidly individualistic way. So we have to start taking apart the systems and examining them. Like, let's take, for instance, partisan politics. So what my liberal friends will often say is like, we need to tweak the system. We need Band-Aids on the system. We need to end gerrymandering. We need to increase the number of Supreme Court justices. We need to stop the, X, Y, and Z. We just need to elect another Barack Obama. We need to just have better candidates. We need to have better fundraising. Whatever it is, these are putting Band-Aids on a broken system because the system is so adversarialist, that it doesn't matter what you do. It's based on gobs and gobs of money and people trying to beat each other up and gain power. And you could say, well, that's human nature. And it's like, yeah, that's human nature, but it's also human nature to be kind. It's also human nature to show compassion and cooperation. That's also, from the dawn of time, humans have cooperated to live and to get along. And you can focus on those qualities as well, what we'll call like the higher qualities. So the whole spiritual revolution part of my book is a kind of an examination of these broken systems and how through a kind of a spiritual rejuvenation and deconstruction that we can, in fact, change things in the world. It will be hard because we're talking about, I keep this quote on my desk. Let me show you. One of my favorite quotes from Buckminster Fuller. It says, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete."
Yeah.
So,
a geodesic dome,
for instance, you create. Well, he did. He created a whole new model of architecture to say, hey, instead of square walls, let's look at this geodesic dome, and maybe maybe this is going to serve us better in the long run. And he achieved a great deal. So I could go into great detail on some of the specifics that need to be done and how they can be done. We live in a cynical age, especially us Gen X people, like you said. So it's easy to kind of roll your eyes and be like, oh, it'll never change. Do you remember in the 70s when people used to talk about world peace, Guy?
I'm a late Gen Xer, but I remember people talking about things like that. Yes,
people were always talking about world peace.
During the sort of the Reagan Gorbachev years, and of course, yes.
Yeah. So people thought it was possible, and it's only recently that I think they've won by everyone like, it'll never be possible. We're screwed. We'll never have peace. We have to imagine peace, and then we have to put together a really practical plan on how to get there. But it is possible. But we have to have hope and encourage optimism to get there.
Yeah. You know, it occurs to me, and maybe this is just plainly obvious, and I'm just kind of slow, that there are a lot of really interesting thinkers who have popularized, Eastern concepts and philosophies. I was just talking to somebody about BKS Iyengar, right, who brought yoga, the practice of yoga to the West, right? He's the guy. And, there are plenty of people who have, John Kabat-Zinn and some of these American Buddhists who've brought these ideas to wider audiences. Ryan Holiday talks about Stoicism. And it occurs to me that really what you're talking about and what you're writing about is kind of a translation, in a sense, of your faith. Like, essentially, the tenets of Baha'i, because the Baha'i faith takes all faiths and sort of draws from each and every one. Is that a sort of a fair read of what one of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I'm essentially, in my book, I'm kind of ripping off the Baha'i faith in the sense that the Baha'i faith recognizes.
I mean, in the best way, not in a cynical way. But
In the Baha'i faith takes into account the inherent divinity of all the world's faiths, and as Baha'is, we are able to take them all in and put them into practice. That we believe that the Krishna, the Buddha, Muhammad, Abraham, Zoroaster, Jesus, the Buddha, they all came from one God, from one source, an all-loving providence that defies understanding and definition. And the tools that they brought down, the teachings, are for all of humanity to benefit from. There's more to the Baha'i faith than that. Baha'is follow a new teacher called Baha'u'llah, whose name means the glory of God, and believe that Baha'u'llah brought a whole new kind of revelation and new invigorating ideas that humanity needs at this stage in its evolution and development. So Baha'is are also, as a Baha'i, I'm also a Christian. As a Baha'i, I'm also a Buddhist. As a Baha'i, I'm a Jew. And as a Baha'i, I'm also a follower of Baha'u'llah's and his teachings. But you're precisely right that we can all benefit from these various teachings and tools and put them into practice on an individual way, but we also can put them to practice in a kind of social justice way, in a transformative sociological method.
I've seen, and I've asked you a version of this question earlier about just comedy and earnestness and, people in comedy are also very intelligent. I think it requires a lot of intelligence to write funny things. I mean, the smartest people are usually the best comedians, and I've seen episodes of your show, where you interview other comedians, Mindy Kaling, for example. I just watched that one. And I wonder, do you ever, when you have conversations about these things, if you do, you do on the show, but when you do privately, or maybe not privately, but when you do, I can't imagine there's eye rolls, right? Because that would be rude. But how does your kind of cohort respond now?
It's one of the wonders of middle age is you stop caring what people think about you. And it's just such a wonderful release. And I I used to care so much what people thought of me, and it just weighed me down every day. And I would spend hours every day ruminating over, oh no, did I say something wrong to upset this person? And do they like me or do they not like me? And I'm just so grateful to be relieved of that. But yeah, there were plenty of eye rolls, and plenty of people think that I'm just weird beyond measure and just do not understand. I mean, because to people, to a certain set of people, and I understand where they're coming from, the idea religion is the problem. It's the problem. Why would you possibly go to the problem to look for a solution that is so backwards? The biggest issue we've got going in this country is religious fundamentalism and the judgmentalism and nationalism and kind of violence that comes with that. So, I get it. But at the same time, along my path, there have been many people that they get what I'm trying to do and what I'm about and what I believe in and respect it and share their own beliefs. I mean, a majority of people on The Office went to church regularly. By far, you just never hear about that. But pretty much, I don't know it's hard for me to think of ones that don't go to either church or synagogue on a regular basis. So it was a very, dare I say it, religious group of people making comedy. We might be different than your average Hollywood sitcom, but it's true.
Obviously you were in the Weird Al movie as Dr. Demento's a great role. And there are many, many more things you can do if you wanted to do them. Sort of now looking at the second phase of your career, what do you imagine that you want to do? I mean, a lot of people in your position will start a production company and will start to make films and will direct them and will write them, or we'll get a completely different role. I mean, think about Alan Alda. He's like Hawkeye, and then he becomes several other characters over his career. A presidential candidate on The West Wing and other characters, or Judith Light. Do you want to create or be part of the creation of a new iconic character again? Do you care? Is that not really interesting to you? Do you want to make films? Do you want to really focus your time and attention and resources on this mission around spirituality, or all of those things?
That's a great question. That is one that I wrestle with. I'm not sure what this next chapter of mine brings. I'm so passionate about helping the mental health epidemic in young people and addressing that, and passionate about kind of spiritual ideas. I'll tell you, one of the things I got to do that is incredible is May 18th, there's a new show that I did that's coming out on Peacock called Rainn Wilson and the Geography of Bliss. And get this, I got paid to travel the world and interview people about happiness and try and find happiness from different cultures and how we can learn from those different cultures and bring that back. So it's comedy, and it's also mental, it's spiritual and psychological upliftment and inspiration. And it's a perfect intersection of kind of my two tracks as an actor and as kind of a spiritual ideas thinker. And I'm so blessed to be a part of the show. It's absolutely terrific. It comes out on Peacock this spring. Sorry for the plug.
No, it's Eric Weiner wrote the book. I know Eric used to be a reporter with me when both of us were at NPR.
Oh yeah, Eric, he's an executive producer. We got his the rights to his book, and the ideas in his book kind of inspired our journey. But I've been fortunate in the last 10 years since The Office ended, because I can't believe it's been 10 years. I've been really fortunate with the roles I've gotten since The Office. Not a whole lot of people have seen them, but I just feel so psyched about the work that I've done. And
Super.
Yeah, Super, and
obviously.
Movies like Hesher.
Well, that was during The Office. But
a bunch of independent films that no one saw, but I think I did really good and interesting work in them. I did a cop show on Fox called Backstrom that was short-lived, but it was really challenging and cool. I did a a really cool show on Amazon called Utopia that no one saw, and a really fun role of a nerdy scientist who's trying to save the world. And I've gotten to, and that's what I feel. That's me as an actor. I play roles. You know, I've played dozens of roles in the theater and dozens of roles in film and TV. This one, Dwight, I'm most known for, but there's dozens more that I've played and will continue to play. If one of them hits and becomes like iconic like Dwight, you know, that would be cool. It's such a long shot. It probably won't, but I think I want to do both. You know, I would love to be on another comedy. I'd love to direct movies. I'd like to write more books. I'm really excited to go on this book tour and be touring the country and talking about these big ideas that I'm passionate about. And at the same time, if I can make people laugh along the way, then win-win.
Yeah. Rainn Wilson, thank you so much.
Thanks, Guy Raz. I never thought I'd say, after listening to Guy Raz for decades, I can't believe I'm like, thanks, Guy Raz.
That's actor and comedian Rainn Wilson. I'm Guy Raz, and you've been watching The Great Creators. Thank you so much for watching. Please do click the subscribe button so you won't miss any new episodes of our show. And also, please check out our podcast. Just look for The Great Creators. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find all of our previous episodes with people like Tom Hanks and Jason Sudeikis and Bjork and so many others. Thanks for watching, and I will see you back here very soon.